Good afternoon. On behalf of the Black Maternal Federal Health Policy Collective, I'm Venicia Gray. I'm a Black woman in an office wearing a marigold dress, and I use she, her, y'all pronouns. I am a director at the Vogel Group, and I am delighted to moderate this discussion in recognition of Black Breastfeeding Week. Please join me in welcoming our fantastic panelist, Shannon Allen, owner of Desires of the Heart, doula and lactation care, Denise Symonette Mitchell, public health consultant and founder of Symonette Strategies and Solutions LLC, and the Kimberly Seals Allers, founder of the Irth app and co-founder of Black Breastfeeding Week. We are so honored. This year's Black Breastfeeding Week theme is boots on the ground, rooted in breastfeeding success, grounded in community support. Hand fans and popular line dances aside, boots on the ground is a strong theme. It's a call to action. So Kimberly, as co-creator of Black Breastfeeding Week, what does boots on the ground mean to you in 2025? How does this theme resonate with your work? Why is this community support so critical for Black families?
Thank you so much. This is Kimberly Seals Allers, and I'm wearing a white blouse, and I'm sitting in a kitchen with white cabinets. I have said for many, many years that whatever the question, the answer is in the community. This has been a standard slide in every presentation. And so I think that when we look at many of the issues, whether we're talking about inequities in breastfeeding, birth, across the line, we know that the answers have always been in our community. And now I'm so excited about the ways that we are recentering community and getting back to those community-centered solutions, which have always been there. And so this year for Black Breastfeeding Week, in addition to wanting to, make the cultural nod, to really honor that the Black breastfeeding gains and wins have been mostly due to community-led efforts. They have been led by Black and brown people, leading what breastfeeding support needed to look like for us from the ground up. And so because that has been so critical, so instrumental in helping to address racial disparities in breastfeeding engagement and duration, we thought it was really important to lift those up. And I think the second piece for that is that, Black Breastfeeding Week has always been about a celebration, right? It was never a time where we're going to be talking about the negative statistics or disparities. From inception, it was always about celebrating that we do this and we just need more support, and saying that this is something that we own and that we're reclaiming, right? And so I think bringing that element of joy into Black Breastfeeding Week has always been a part of it. And so we were super excited to see, the double meanings and the triple meanings of incorporating a joyful celebratory line dance with a truth about what breastfeeding support looks like and body feeding support and success looks like in our community.
Thank you so much, Madam Co-Creator. Denise and Shannon, how does this theme resonate with your work, and why do you guys believe community support is so critical for our Black and brown families?
Hi, this is Denise Symonette Mitchell. I am wearing a black shirt with rainbow letters that says Kindergarten Squad, and I am in an office with a black backdrop. Boots on the ground to me represents our collective work and our collective joy, as we just shared. And I also want to take a moment just to say how delighted I am to be here with the Kimberly Seals Allers. It is truly such a joy and an honor. And the same with my very new friend, Shannon Allen. So I am delighted and engulfed in the collective joy today. Today, I sent my breastfeeding baby, the one who introduced me to breastfeeding, the one who made me a mama, to kindergarten. And so the kindergarten squad, the collective joy is deep within my bones on this date, especially. And so to answer your question, Venicia, about why is community support so crucial for Black families? Well, because it's deeply woven into the very, very, very fabric of our being, of our meaning making, and that is across the diaspora. This is well established in the literature from arts and humanities, social medicine, history, anthropology, and of course, public health. I'm a newly minted doctor of public health candidate. So I sort of had to dive back into that piece. And also, we define community in such varied ways that to be grounded in community support with boots on the ground and stilettos in the ground is to be gifted with the full essence, the sustenance of what we need to not just survive, as we just heard, but to thrive as a community, as a people, for our mamas and our babies and our families at large.
Thank you, Shannon. I'll give you a chance to answer our first question as well before we move on.
Awesome. Thank you. So I am Shannon Allen. I am in a room with white walls. I have on a white shirt and my vest to represent boots on the ground. So to me, this thing, it really hits home, not because 803 Fresh is also from South Carolina, but it's actually what we do in our everyday lives. As a doula and community health worker and lactation specialist, we are the boots on the ground. We are the ones that mom reach out to for help. We're that community that's needed. And it's very important to have that community and have faces that look like you within that community. I can recall when I started back with my oldest son, I didn't have that community and how lonely that can feel. So to be the boots on the ground and to help our families, that's all this thing means to me. It's just being there, walking beside them.
I love it. I love it. So now let's turn, I think, to policy. Denise, you have lived in the policy world. I think we all have. When you look back at the wins, whether it's the Pump Act or some state level changes, what feels like a breakthrough moment where lactation policy finally got some teeth?
Absolutely. This is a great question. As a member on sabbatical, right, of the Black Maternal Health Federal Policy Collective, of course, we will always uplift and celebrate the Momnibus, which has now been introduced 3 times, and we're just a few months shy of second session, so I can believe that we're going to see a 4th one very soon. But within the Momnibus, which I can guess some others may talk about, or you may have already heard quite a bit about, I will say that the Perinatal Workforce Act is one that really stands out within that comprehensive omnibus bill. And that is now one that I get to sort of live as a HRSA-funded maternal child health training scholar. So we need our workforce to represent the community, okay? The community serving the community, and the Perinatal Workforce Act ensures that that happens. But I also would like to mention the Access to Donor Breast Milk Act, which was the first ever bipartisan bill, and it was also bicameral, that addressed expanded access to and awareness of donor breast milk. Okay, so that was first introduced last Congress by Representative Houlihan from Pennsylvania 06 in the House, and then of course Senator Duckworth in the Senate. So as an extended breastfeeding mom who nursed for over 3 consecutive years, one of my greatest honors and privileges was donating some of my own breast milk. And it was actually in New Orleans in NOLA where I was able to donate some milk to a medically vulnerable infant. So the Access to Donor Breast Milk Act ensures increased access to this nutrient-rich first food, and it provides increased education and awareness about this side of breastfeeding science and human lactation that may get a little less visibility.
Fantastic. So Shannon and Kimberly, what are some policy milestones that you think changed the game for Black breast and chest feeding?
Well, I can say locally, one thing that really stood out was the South Carolina Lactation Act that started in 2019, and that allowed our families to actually get paid for their maternity leave. if mom isn't well mentally, physically, and financially, that has a big effect on her breast milk as well as on her infant. So being able to be home in peace, to know that you still be receiving a paycheck, even when you go back to work, you'll have a space where you can breastfeed, as well as appropriate time where you can breastfeed, and then you won't be penalized for that. So I think that was a huge win for us home in South Carolina.
Yeah, and I would just underscore that. I think one of the most significant policy benefits for breastfeeding and body feeding on a state level has been the paid leave, right? We know that in our country, Paid Leave US says that 25% of women are going back to work 14 days after childbirth, which is ridiculous. Whenever I hear that statistic, my vagina hurts. It's unacceptable in our country for women to be going back to work that soon. And of course, if you're going back to work in 14 days, breastfeeding seems like a privilege that you don't have. And so paid leave, as much as we think about it as time off, it has been one of the significant policy improvements. And we're very grateful for all the states that have moved forward with that, given as how we still remain the only industrialized nation that doesn't have a real federal paid leave policy. So hopefully we get to that too. In terms of other policies, I always like policies that are connected to the context of people's lives, right? If breastfeeding and body feeding is something that you either have to do because, at home, or you only allowed to do it if you're not going to work, it's not going to happen. So in addition to paid leave, those laws that have helped people pump at work, again, significant that we got people out of the bathrooms. It seems so simple, but it was a really heavy lift that happened during the Obama administration, that we were like, no, you don't have to. Nobody here wants to eat in the bathroom, but somehow we had to make sure that mamas were allowed to pump, had someplace safe and clean with a plug and a chair, so that they couldn't have to pump in the bathroom. So I think these really, small things that were so really shape-shifting for the landscape of what we needed to do, which was to have policy that was rooted in the context of our lives here in the US, where we didn't have paid leave, where people are going back to work, where many people were being shamed off of public buses for nursing their baby when they need to continue to feed their baby while they run their errands, right? These, for me, were some of the policy wins, particularly those around breastfeeding in public, that really helped expand the actual cultural acceptance of body feeding beyond just a policy in place. I just want to end, because I'm so excited by this conversation about donor milk, and wanting to share that what Denise is saying is so significant. And not to do a spoiler alert, but this week we are announcing a new donor milk initiative that is going to actually increase access to donor milk for infants who have been impacted by the Black maternal mortality crisis. Everyone is aware that when an infant has lost their mother, they are already vulnerable by beyond any definition. But yet many of those families had to fight to get donor milk for those mothers. I have been involved with those fights with individual milk banks, trying to get that infant the best infant nutrition possible, given that they're already at a disadvantage. And so now, through a partnership I've created with Himbana, we have 15 milk banks who've signed on to say two important things. One, if an infant loses their mother due to the maternal mortality crisis in the country, these milk banks will provide 7 days of milk, no questions asked, right? Let's get that infant that immediate nutrition. Number two, now we have a nationwide network of partner milk banks. So if a mother tragically dies in New York City, you can go to the milk bank in Chicago and donate breast milk, and that milk bank will send it directly to the family in New York City. It is no longer have to be on the burden of the local community, going back to our theme, to milk raise for that infant. And so these are some of the things that I'm also very excited about. How do we bring others in so that we can, one, support communities, but not leave the burden solely on communities? And then what are we doing to make sure that infants who have lost their mother still have access to mother's milk? So excited to talk about. It's called the Restoration Project, and the website is trpforbabies.com. So looking forward to sharing that out.
You heard it here, folks. Congratulations on that fantastic, fantastic effort, Kimberly. I want to stay here when we're talking about the barriers. You know, we talked about some bright spots, some policy ones, but I think we would lose an opportunity and I talk about some of the barriers, right? So, what are some of the key drivers around some policy changes that we haven't seen? What are some of the barriers that we've seen as advocates and community that we really need to overcome? And I want to start with you, Shannon.
Great, thank you. So I can say the biggest barrier is having our doulas and lactation staff not being paid. Here we don't have a reimbursement. Well, let me take that back. One of our Medicaid companies did approve a virtual doula and lactation support. However, you know, sometimes families need in person. So we still have our local WIC offices that provide that support. But our boots on the ground are in the community, our doulas and lactation support. You know, a lot of them do it from the love of the heart. But however, when you're going to see a mom and you don't have gas to get there, because you aren't being funded, you don't want to put a strain on the family. So funding is very important, and that is one of our biggest barrier here, the lack of funds and grants. But I can say on a positive note, I know we're talking about barriers, but I want to add in there too that we do have a lot of community resources here as well. We have the IMM Mommy and Me Cafe, which is through South Carolina State University, partnered with DPH. We have Dr. Tisha Felder with Mocha Milk, who has been boots on the ground. We even have our local collectives, our Black Doulas of Columbia with Ebony Garnett. We have different resources, but it's funding that we need help to push, so we can remove that barrier in our for our families.
Fantastic. Thank you, Denise.
Yes, Shannon, thank you for that. And I'm in complete agreement. Funding is what I would describe as one of the greatest barriers. And I'll talk about it on the academic side, and especially because you mentioned South Carolina State University, HBCU love. I am a Howard alum, and I see a hand from Venicia as well. So I think it's important that we talk about funding our academic institutions as well, in addition to our Perinatal Workforce Act, which can and does extend to the research space as well. So what we often see is that by the time the money is trickled down, I was going to think of a nice synonym or another way to describe it, but once the money is trickled down, it's already been sustained, I guess, even for a short period of time within an academic institution. So what I believe we need to focus on is ensuring equitable funding across the academic community and ensuring that those who are members of the community, like myself, are also gifted with the funding, the equitable access to funding to be the research scientist, okay? We have the lived experience. We can ensure that there is equitable investment to ensure that other piece is in place as well. So if we want to publish, right? If we want to start our own institutions, if we would like to contribute in this way or that way, that funding piece is essential. And from what I recall, there are definitely less than 20, but I believe that number can drop down to 10. I don't have the stats in front of me. And Avery has asked us to not just rattle off numbers anyhow. So there are less than 20 HBCUs with schools of public health. There are 5 HBCUs with schools of medicine. So we need to ensure equitable funding for our institutions that train the next generation of research scholars who will go on to lead the CDC, the NIH, HRSA, CMS, and beyond, to ensure that breastfeeding science and human lactation remain a central focus within the maternal child health conversation. Thank you.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, I mean, these are such amazing points. And, I think that, and since we've talked about local and Denise is so good at the policy piece, I'll talk about structural and systemic barriers, because I think, we know that we live in a highly commercialized healthcare system, right? And so commercial interests are actually a force against breastfeeding and body feeding success and engagement. We know that there is a multi-billion-dollar commercial industry that only really can get new customers if breastfeeding fails. And so we can't have these conversations without understanding the commercial influence around breastfeeding failure, the commercial influence around making sure that there are not policies for every policy that Denise is talking about and Shannon is speaking of. I assure you there were lobbyists from other industries showing up to make sure those policies don't get passed. And I've been at those meetings where the lobbyists show up and they're representing some of the commercial interests that are behind infant formula and breast milk substitutes industry in this country. And so I think that is a big barrier. And then when we get down to getting over that, there's an issue of actual will. I am encouraged by seeing more politicians who identify as parents who may be sensitive to this issue. I think younger politicians who have the lived experience, as is mentioned, which is so critical to getting why this is so important. I think that's something that's been a barrier that's now being alleviated in some small way. And then, lastly, I want to talk about the barrier of not valuing mothering as important work, right? That this thing of producing food that people who have lactation plumbing can uniquely do is something that is not valued, and that there is a big food industry that is even fighting for our very first meal and wants to be our first food, whereas that may not be the most nutritious option. So these are all real barriers. And, I'm just grateful that smart people are figuring out how we go under, through, over, around, and everything else in between.
Absolutely. I mean, we could talk about this all day, but unfortunately, before we end this webinar, I want to go and think about future challenges. I want to think about some solutions. So let's talk about what's coming next. What are the most pressing challenges we can anticipate in the next few years for advancing lactation policy? How can advocates kind of navigate these changes successfully? Let's start with Denise.
Sure thing. I love this question too. I agree. I can talk about this all day, forever. So I would say centering on public health research and population health, I think what we need to be advocating for as we move forward with this Congress second session, which is about 3 to 4 months from now, not even counting all of the federal holidays that are upcoming, and even the Congress that follows that one, the new Congress that follows that one. I think we need to be looking at the NIH Improve Act. And this is Denise Symonette Mitchell, the student speaking. And that bill was first introduced last Congress by the beloved, never forgotten Senator LaFonza Butler of California in the Senate. And then, of course, my favorite Congresswoman Lauren Underwood in the House. So this was another bipartisan bill, okay? In the Senate, we're talking California and Alabama senators coming together to advance this piece of legislation. So the NIH Improve Act ensures funding for continued research on the maternal care and mortality crisis here in this country. And I know some may say, okay, we've got enough research. We understand what's happening. But as we've heard, it's a commercialized country, right? The industry is so expansive. In addition to that, evidence-based undergirds everything. And so if we ensure funding for training, for research, we can ensure that breastfeeding science and human lactation, which I've spoken of for years and will continue until I can no longer, remains a central part of the conversation. I opened by stating how excited I was to be here with the Kimberly Seals Allers. Well, before I met her, her work introduced me, and I've shared this with you, to what was happening, right? And we want to ensure that I have to wrap up. I just saw a note. We want to ensure that funding, that access, that quality remains central as it relates to breastfeeding, chest feeding, human lactation, breastfeeding science. We want to make sure that it remains a central part of the conversation because, as Kimberly can share, that was not always the case. And due to the infant formula shortage, it became more central than it had ever been before. And I am concerned that it may be taking a back seat as other fires ignite around us. So the NIH Improve Act is one that ensures equitable funding at the academic side for our future scientists who will lead this work forward and more.
Amazing. So Kimberly or Shannon, 1 minute. Tell us a little bit about those challenges. No pressure.
I'll go real quick. I can't say it enough. Funding. We need the funds in order to do the work, as well as we need to keep this topic alive. We need to keep infant and maternal health at the State House and higher levels. We need to make sure that none of this work goes dead. We need funding, and we need to keep talking about it, keep bringing it to the forefront. And the rest is for Kim.
I will close this by saying, as I said in my book, women don't breastfeed, cultures do. And so I think what we need is a cultural revolution for breastfeeding and bottom feeding. And that is something that we can do within. For me, that means media representation. Why aren't there more Black breastfeeding women in our TV shows? And how are we bringing that through and asking those who are content creators just to normalize it, right? And so I think as we're pushing for policy, we know that culture can impact policy. And so all of these things are interconnected. And so what I want to see is a culture, that we build a culture inside the Black community that supports breastfeeding and body feeding. And we take that forward to push for all the other changes that we deserve and need for our families.
Perfect. For anyone, 1 minute before we close, I just want you to speak directly to the advocates, policymakers, and families listening. What is the one thing we need them to know? And I think I'll give it to you, co-creator, founder.
Oh my goodness. The one thing I need all advocates to know is that we see you, we appreciate you. Look at what we've done. Oh my goodness, right? Black Breastfeeding Week is now in its 14th year. And so I just want us to all have a extreme sense of pride. I'm sitting here with my Black Breastfeeding Week fan because I'm ready to get to clacking for this week. And so please, I just want to say thank you. I'm so honored to see where the movement is, so grateful for those who have supported, and be proud. We've done so much, and our families deserve more, but we're getting there.
Fantastic. You have to tell us offline where to get these fans. But what I'm hearing today, there's so much intersectionality, so much worth and education, and just the work is here in our community. So the boots are on the ground and need to continue. So with that being said, as we continue to celebrate Black Breastfeeding Week, remember it's not just about 1 week in August. It's about centering those Black voices year-round in policy conversations beyond. So I want to thank our incredible panelists, Kimberly Seals Allers, Denise Symonette Mitchell, and Shannon Allen, for sharing their experience, their expertise. Thank you to the collective. Thank you to the Century Foundation for making this conversation possible for our accessible needs, all the folks in the background, and to Elizabeth. For follow-up resources, be sure to stay tuned for ways to stay engaged. Thanks, everyone.